Hi guys, and welcome back to day 28 of Inktober. So today I'm using pretty much the same stuff as I used yesterday. I'm using the same paper, which is Strathmore watercolor paper. I'm using the Finetec gold mica watercolor. I'm using the Higgins black magic for the line work and a Sumi ink for the ink wash itself. And I'll have a link to all of the tools and everything that I use down in the description box. But yeah, today I wanted to do one that was a straight on portrait, and I don't know. There's a thing about pieces like this that I find really powerful and I love. And I know that probably objectively when I do a lot of these they might tend to look a little bit boring or stale, but there's just this like power to having a connection directly with the character that I've always loved and I've been really fascinated with. And I remember during one of my art history classes we were talking about that, how a lot of historical paintings, when they were painting royalty, they would specifically paint them in a very straight on kind of an angle because it was very powerful and it showed that connection and that eye directly into you. And it was just, that's when I realized that's kind of why I love doing pieces like this, where it's just a straight on portraiture and it's just really very powerful. And yeah, I really do love them, and I have to kind of force myself to do a different perspective and a different angle on the head and try to include other things because I don't want to be too repetitive and I don't want all of my pieces to be like this. But every once in a while it is nice to be able to just come back to it and do something that I am actually really fond of, and I really do like this composition. I do think it's really striking. Even though it's very simple, it does have kind of that power to it, which I like. I like the balance of it being an actually relatively simple composition. But when I was recording this, I actually forgot to reposition the camera from where it was earlier, and I'm glad that I'm able to see the benefits of this new position that I've been doing it at, because I've been doing it farther back and at an angle, so you're looking more under my hand at what I'm drawing, and that is exciting because it means that I can do a lot more traditional stuff. Before Inktober, I really wanted to do more traditional pieces, but I hadn't quite figured out the angle to have the camera in, and I always felt like most of it was covered up with my hand, and the quality of the final piece was never very good because you could never really see what was going on. And so I'm really happy that I've finally kind of figured a solution that I really like, but it doesn't foreshorten the image too much, or it doesn't really come at too much of an angle. But I usually reposition it right over it when I'm doing ink washes, because the way that I hold the brush, it's much farther back so you can actually see what's happening. But I did forget to reset it for this one, so for the first probably half or most of this piece, I'm working right over it. So unfortunately, a lot of it's kind of hidden, but at least it's a reminder for me to make sure that I have it positioned right, and that going forward I can do a lot better quality traditional pieces, because I can show these things that I've been really not been able to show yet. So yeah, I will make sure that I'm angling it better, making sure that everything's set up a little bit better. But because of Inktober, I'm just like moving from one to the next, and it's just really actually great. I love not having a big downtime between one piece to the next, so I absolutely have been loving the energy of moving on from one piece and immediately it's time to get a new one out. I feel like the inspiration that I have and this creativity, it's been a lot more potent because of Inktober, because I find that I'll do a piece that I'm really excited about, but rather than waiting a couple days to do a more finished piece like that, or not really having a deadline for the next piece, it kind of stagnates and it doesn't turn into anything. But because of Inktober and because I'm required to get another piece out like right away, I find that I'm feeding off of that past energy and the drive that I had, and other like resources and concepts that I was really excited about but didn't quite fit into the current piece. I'm able to turn into a new piece, and it's just this like steamrolling effect of moving from one exciting piece into something that I am equally excited about or more excited about. So Inktober has been really great overall as far as giving me that energy to create pieces that I'm actually really excited about, because that's a big issue, is that a lot of the things I find that I've been working on, they're things that I'm not always that interested in, but Inktober is helping me realize what stuff I am interested in and what stuff I'm not, and I don't want to spend time on things that I'm not as invested in anymore. And I find that I've been finding a lot better resources for looking at characters and how I want to draw them and how I want to draw hair and clothing. And that's really making me feel a lot more ready to jump into a new character and explore new themes. For this one, I was really inspired by this really beautiful, long, soft hair that I found a reference for, and the way that it kind of curled around it and how she had it wrapped around behind her head. It was all of these shapes that I really wanted to try out, and I wanted to see if I could push them and make them more exaggerated. And that was like the general hair shape that I have for her is one that is kind of new for me, and that's really great because it does mean that it's pushing me to find new shape languages that I can use, new types of lines that I can use, even when I'm not necessarily even looking up reference, or when I am looking up reference, I can use these same kind of strokes that I've already learned in these new references and these new styles and the new way that I want to show it, and it just all becomes more connected into my own style and the way that I like to do them. So yeah, basically I'm just feeling really good about the reference that I've been looking at. It's a lot more inspiring to me than a lot of the stuff that I think I've been looking at, and it's just really helpful to have a very strong jumping off point before I start a piece, because when I'm looking at stuff that it's like, I really do want to draw that, I want to draw something like that, I want to draw something that makes me feel the same way that this piece does, when I have that energy and those visual ideas in my head, it is just so much easier to produce a piece that I'm happy with, as opposed to when I'm sitting there thinking, well, I need to do something, well, what am I going to draw? I'm not really sure. I guess I'm just going to start sketching. It just, for me personally, having something already in my head to start off with is so helpful for me to be able to just dive into a piece that I'm actually really looking forward to doing. And one thing that I've noticed about the ink washes, though, is that it's a lot harder to get very smooth washes with these cheaper papers than it is with the Arches paper that I use. When I use the Arches, it is a lot easier to be able to get this really smooth texture, but I've noticed with these papers, there are some areas where like it'll start to dry in a weird way, which will push out some of the ink, and then you get some of these little like splotchy areas, which it's a little bit frustrating at times, but I've learned to kind of deal with it in a way that I incorporate it into the piece itself. So when these elements happen, I like to push them a little bit more so that it looks more texturized and it looks like it was intentional, and that is the direction that the piece is supposed to go in. So when I did that flat ink wash behind her, around the inkwork for her head, it started to do that thing where it kind of dried and it kind of pushed the pigment a little bit, so it wasn't flat anymore and it didn't really come flush to her hair in a very smooth way, and it just looked a little bit splotchy there. So because of that, I did another ink wash where I started to focus little dots of ink where it was just a little bit darker, and I focused it around her head so it would hit there and then spread out a little bit, radiating from around her. And I did it around her shoulders, and I did it in a few areas out in the middle of the background so that it would connect it there and it wouldn't look too out of place. But I've just been noticing that I like to be able to have these slight issues because it does give me a chance to think more creatively on how to fix it and what I can do to push it better so that it doesn't look like a mistake anymore. It looks like what it was meant to be from the very beginning. And I like those challenges, actually. It's really exciting to take something that went a little bit wrong and then turn it into something that I actually feel really good about. And I feel better about that than I do necessarily about my original concept or what I wish that it had turned into. But as I was working on this, I started realizing that I didn't really like the shape of the brooch that I gave her, because it kind of started out something differently, and then as I was inking it, it turned into something a little bit different, and I didn't really like that shape anymore, and I didn't really like the bands that were coming in as much as I did when I was doing the line work. So that area of her clothing, I wanted to find a way to make it look better. I felt like that was a weak point in the piece. So what I did was I gave it a much darker ink wash for her clothing. It needed to be dark enough that it was darker than her hair, so her hair was still a lighter value so it would stand out and it wouldn't get lost in her clothing. But I also wanted it to be light enough that I could go in there with a darker detail on top. So what I did was I gave it that that kind of medium dark value for the whole area of her clothing. And then I took a step even darker with more ink in it, where I started doing these kind of flicking motions with my brush in the middle of that area where I had that brooch and those ribbons where there was the most wrinkles coming together. I started doing those and I built it up more and more. And then I gave the hem of her clothing and right around her neckline, I gave those little flicks there too. And then I started building them up. And then eventually I went in with the straight ink itself, the waterproof ink. And I finished that off so that that brooch was completely covered with the dark, but it was all very well blended in. And that was another example of something that turned into a look that I was much happier with than the original look. I feel like that kind of tattered, worn, built up look to it really fit the mood that I wanted for this piece way more than that initial design of the clothing. So I'm really happy that it was able to turn in from something that was a definite weak spot in the piece into something that I am really happy with. But I did decide that I felt it was just a little bit plain for what I wanted, and I wanted to balance out the top a little bit more to the bottom, so it had a little bit of a mirroring effect as far as the mass that was on the bottom and the top. So I just took my circle drawer slash cutter tool and I actually marked on the masking tape halfway through the paper so I would make sure that it was perfectly symmetrical and centered, and you can see where the crosshairs of this circle thing are, and I just took that and I put it right on top of that line, and I did a 6-inch diameter one for the bottom and then I think a 5.5 for the top one, and then I filled in the top one solid and I gave a little bit of a stripe at that second one, and I like that, just that little bit more detailing of having that extra little line there. But that is everything for today's Inktober. I will mention I'm actually pretty happy with the tape situation because I've been able to get very non-sticky results for the last few of them. They haven't torn at all and they haven't stuck too much to the paper. Like these ones are nice and smooth and everything, so that is a big relief. But yeah, she is actually available, the original as usual. She's available at my shop, and there is a gold sheen that's kind of subtle, but it's overall over most of the piece for this one. I mixed a lot of it into the ink while I was working on it, but yes, she is available, the original, and I'll have a link down in the corner of the video where you can check that out, as well as in the description. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow for tomorrow's Inktober, so thank you, and I'll see you then.